All right, welcome back. Okay, so we're going to be doing Microeconomics Chapter 16. This is going to be information, risk, and insurance. And so basically we'll focus on asymmetric information, imperfect information, and how that breaks some of the assumptions of what we've been talking about so far. And then how insurance works and some basics of sort of the hazards of insurance and why government has to step in to make sure everyone buys insurance sometimes. And then some of the problems specifically with the American healthcare system that we'll discuss at the end. So if you have read the chapter and you want to pull out the notes from the files section of Canvas, you will find notes chapter 16 and pause me and we'll get going. Okay, so section 16.1, the problem of imperfect information and asymmetric information. One of the big assumptions in at least the historical early economics was that there's complete information in the system, that both buyers and sellers in a rational market have all of the information, and that they have a balance of information at 100% basically, and so that everything in the market on the supply and demand side is running smoothly because of this assumption of perfect information. The real world isn't really like that, right? So this is one of the problems of at least the early stage models and rational choice theory and things of this sort. Asymmetric information causes imbalances in who has power in a relationship, right? It causes leverage differences in the two different parties in a contractual obligatory relationship. So if you have a buyer and a seller, if the seller has a lot more information about the product than the buyer does, they can take advantage of the situation, and like they talk about in the chapter, they can sell you a lemon if it's a car, or I actually sell comics. It's sort of my hobby / my little sort of, side job if I want to make some vacation money, that kind of thing. I've been collecting and investing in comics for about 15 or 20 years, most of my life, and it's an important part of selling on eBay is there's a lot of bad pictures out there. There's a lot of people who will sell you busted books that the pictures look nice but the book is not nice, or it's a 100-year-old book, something that came out in the 40s or the early 50s, which is worth a lot of money, and they don't tell you that the staples are a part inside the book, which could, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars for some of these books. In Action Comics #1 recently auctioned for over $4 million. So there's a lot of money involved in some of this higher end stuff. And so if I as the seller want to take advantage of the buyer and say, yes, is this a perfectly complete book? It's not missing any pages. All the staples are attached. It's old and it's kind of maybe busted, but it's at least everything's attached, and so they can very well be lying about that. And it's really hard to judge that sort of thing unless there's trust in the system, right? Unless you've built up trust and a relationship. There are some other things that you can do to ameliorate these information asymmetries. And like we were talking about, one of them is just building up a reputation with your buyers, or even as a buyer, building up a reputation as someone who is trustworthy and creditworthy, which is why we have credit scores, and this is why banks track your repayment records and things like this so that you can establish a record of creditworthiness. Well, sellers need to do the same thing. And you can build up a reputation. You can use a third-party intermediator which is what financial institutions do. It is what a lot of jobs do, especially high-level jobs. They will hire some company to do a background check on you, to even sometimes run like tax checks on you and credit checks and things of this sort, to make sure that you're a worthy candidate. You can, in the comic world, there are companies like what is called CBCS or CGC that are third-party creditors that will actually give your book a relative grade so that you can change it from just a book, like I'm just promising you that this is what it is, to I've paid to have a third party actually look at the book, seal it, in a vacuum, but also in a plastic case, and then provide you with notes on what is the grade and why is that the grade, and here are any defects that do exist on the book, right? So that you can change it from just an ambiguous book to a sort of an asset, right? Something that a third party has distinguished as, we know both of you have an incentive in either like saying that it's not worth that much or saying it's worth a lot more, and so we will step in and play that intermediate role. And I think there's going to be a lot more room for that if anyone's interested in sort of maybe brainstorming about a new business. There's a whole lot of nostalgia explosions in the market right now, and I think that there's going to be a lot of growth in the accreditation, the third-party accreditation systems for toys and old video games and comic books and all of this, the rest of this nostalgic memorabilia. A lot of it, the infrastructure already exists for some of these things, like not video games, comic books and baseball cards and things. But there are some markets out there that still haven't really established a leader, or even just a general third-party supplier of information. So, interesting thought. Anyway, there are also things that the businesses can do, such as guarantees, warranties. We promise you this will work for 2 years or whatever, or we'll replace the product. Service contract, you pay a small fee. And then we'll come out and we'll fix your car or your washer and dryer set or whatever it is, right? And so these are some of the other ways that you can. I'm sorry, my hotel internet's being weird. Okay, so these are some of the other ways that businesses can try to help to establish a reputation and some trust in the market. Say, if just give our product a try, we'll at least, we'll slap a guarantee on it, or, we'll give you a 30-day money back, or whatever it is. Just give us a shot. It's risk-free is basically what they're trying to a signal that they're sending up to the market. Now, there's some fun research on that too, right? How many people who are disappointed in the product actually take them up on the risk-free try, right? Are you actually going to send back your your crappy bag of chips and try to get like a check for $1.99? It's doubtful, right? But it's a way that they can signal to you that this is risk-free, and of course it works more for bigger purchases, but it's really funny when I see things like, if you hate it, just send it back to us, and it's like, this is a Laffy Taffy. It's worth like 7 cents. Why would I possibly go through the effort? But it's there. It's there. On the other side, if you're in the labor market and you want to show that that a company should take a risk on you, and that you want to provide more information to distinguish yourselves from the fakers, basically, who want to claim that they are highly touted in the statistics market or whatever market you're in. Then you get licensures, you get accreditations, you get degrees, which is the college system. your resume, of course, and they'll do a background check on that sort of thing. But this is the way that you can sort of distinguish yourself in the market. Okay. There are a lot of different ways that imperfect information can affect the market. It can affect supply and demand. It can especially affect sort of the demand side, right? If there's a lot of fear about the future by firms and CEOs and consumers, and there's basically asymmetric information about, say, the American economy versus, here's a good example. In 2008 and 2009, the economies that were doing really well at the time were the Scandinavian nations. They didn't really get caught up in the CDOs, the collateralized debt obligations of the banking collapse. They also had more reserves on hand. They also had a higher tax base to be able to sort of tinker with their macroeconomic policies. And so they took nowhere near the same hit that America, Germany, France, especially states like Portugal and Italy and Ireland took in 2008 and 2009. The Scandinavian countries were doing very, very well. And so the fear in the system meant that the Scandinavians actually did even better because of the fear surrounding them drove investors out of those more ambiguous future countries toward the Scandinavian countries where investors felt things look a little safer for right now. We're going to protect our assets in these states that have a lot more room to be able to play with macroeconomic policies than they did in, say, the United States, which had basically a 0% interest rate. Our economy was burning really hot. We had deregulated everything, and we had turned our SEC into a toothless institution, and so we got ourselves into a little bit of trouble because we had banks just collapsing, and investors and consumers and everyone was freaking out, like, oh man, we got to pull our monies out of stock markets. We need to just like batten down the hatches, and we need to put our money into safe bets, and that ended up being the Scandinavian countries. And so this is where, on the very macro scale, these just the fears of asymmetric information or imperfect information, and maybe even though this information is imperfect, it's less imperfect than this scary information over here, right? And so we're going to flood from this more ambiguous situation into this less ambiguous situation so that we can protect our assets. And that's just how investors think. And that's what happens. And so you can see how these sort of principles can have massive effects on capital flows, on aggregate demand and aggregate supply, all of these sorts of things, on investment, on research and development, on all kinds of stuff. So it's a really interesting, I wouldn't necessarily say nascent or new field, but it's a less established branch of the economics tree, I guess, which basically just started at Homo economicus and rational thought and very simple assumption modeling, and sort of evolved from there and has branched off from there. And on this asymmetrical information side, there's some really cool stuff. There are comparisons of firms and how they argue contracts, I guess. Why are my words not working? There's some really cool research on this asymmetrical information side from neuropathology and neuroscience, and how the brain makes decisions when it doesn't have enough information, from sort of aggregate psychology and fear in markets. And I mean, there's a lot of neat research. So If you're liking this economic stuff and you want to go further, it might be something you're interested in. Okay. There's some really other interesting stuff. Price, right? In a perfect market, would operate as a really great signal of merit or of quality or of whatever you want to think of. It's almost a guarantee that I'm not buying a lemon, right? If I'm buying this $20,000 used car versus this $10,000 used car, and it's the same model and year, something inside us says, well, of course the $20,000 car is nicer. Well, why is there such a gap, right? But it doesn't work like that because there is incomplete and asymmetric information in the system. What happens is you get hacks basically trying to trick the system and trying to take advantage of the idea that price signals quality, and so given that signal, now you get people jumping into the market to fake it, and so they can reap the benefits without actually having to pay the cost of having earned a degree or years of experience or whatever. There's some really cool biology stuff that ties into this behavior, sort of the cuckoos. There's some really neat evolutionary biology on cheating, and how it's almost guaranteed that you'll get small percentages of populations that are cheaters, and that there's a nice balance there, right? In different species, it's say 95% versus 5%. Like there's always 1 in 20 of the population is a cheater and takes advantage of everyone else, and so there becomes this like social watching patterning system, and there's some such cool research out here that's tying evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology, and even just sort of the behavioral patterns of animals and how they tie into modern human economics. Another weird route you can take if you're interested in this stuff. Okay. You guys know how insurance works. It's basically like I'm buying the future that something's going to happen. Your house is going to flood, right? I'm paying off against, I'm hedging my bet against the idea that that's going to happen. It's highly unlikely, but it does happen sometimes. And so you probably pay a small premium because it is highly unlikely. But then in the case that it does happen, you covered your butt, so, I guess, that's the basic idea. We should also say that, though, your payment is theoretically tied to your risk, right? And so if you're a high-risk participant, we're going to talk about car insurance most of the time because it's a lot less politically touchy. So you're a risky driver, you should be paying more for car insurance, right? It's just what makes sense. Sure, you're going to pool everyone's money in and just pay out little pieces here and there when accidents happen and emergencies happen. But safe drivers are probably paying less, and more are probably unsafe drivers are probably paying more. I mean, that's just how it's supposed to work theoretically and morally and everything, right? The problem is we don't have perfect information, and so it's really difficult to be able to determine who goes into which risk categories, and we'll talk about some of the problems even with breaking people down into risk categories. But it makes things really difficult, especially given that if the government steps in and says that everyone has to insure themselves, then that means that some people are inevitably overpaying, right? The safe people, the good drivers, the aware drivers are overpaying for insurance because they have to help pull in for the unsafe drivers, and to make it affordable for everyone, including the unsafe drivers, so that they do participate. You have to kick up the cost for the people at the bottom, right? So it's a really interesting industry. There are some really interesting, not only social good arguments out there on both sides on whether insurance should be government mandated or whether it should not be, and in which industries, right? Because for some reason cars are government mandated, but health insurance is not, or flood insurance is not. Like, which ones should be and should not be mandated, and why, and for what moral reason, and what for legal reason. And so there's a lot of different angles you can approach this from, right? We will talk about some of the reasons why the government does have an incentive to make everyone kick in, and one of those is the pricing system. But we'll talk about some of the others, like moral hazard and others. Let's see. I should mention that there are a few government-funded insurance programs, unemployment, pension programs, which basically a firm has to pay into a government reserve just in case the firm goes bankrupt, so that they can't just say, well, your pensions are gone, sorry. That happened. I shouldn't laugh because it's not funny. It has happened a lot. It's happened a lot, and it should not. And so this is one of the reasons that the government has stepped in and said that, all right, if you're a firm over a certain size, I think it's like 50 employees, or if you're a publicly traded firm, of course, you must pay into pension insurance, so that you don't, just run your company into the ground and just screw everybody in the firm. It's not a good thing. So you also have the FDIC, which is an insurance for bank deposits. You have workers' compensation, which is a small tax, basically, that you pay into in your paycheck. That sets aside a reserve for people who are injured on the job. And then you also have retirement social safety nets, which include both Social Security and Medicare. Medicare is for the elderly. Medicaid is for the poor. We care for the elderly. We aid the poor, right? I guess legislators wanted to make the distinction. I should mention Social Security is a weird program. And it's kind of failing miserably because they keep pulling money out of it. It's not funded well. It is one of the most important programs in ensuring that the elderly do not live in destitute poverty, because, let's be honest, most people don't save. Most people don't even really have the extra income to save. Our system also just never teaches them to save. We have a very consumer-driven system that just tells you, like, to be happy, you have to buy things. And so we kind of, in America, we have a real paucity of savings and retirement accounts. And so Social Security is incredibly important in ensuring that the elderly do not live in poverty and can afford just the bare bones of life. It's like, I don't know, like $1,100 a month or something that they've paid in for the vast majority of their life. You have to pay in like a basic minimum before you're even eligible. There's some real weird little loopholes that have been written into the system, though, over the years. One is that they can keep, I don't know, legislators keep pulling money out of the system to pay for other things, promising that they'll put the money back in Social Security, but they don't. Another problem is that there's this weird cap, right? You pay Social Security only up to The last time I checked, it was like $115,000. And then from $115,000 to $1 billion, $1 trillion, you don't pay a penny of Social Security tax, which I'm being honest, I don't really understand why or how that works. I don't understand why the super rich wouldn't be paying into this. It seems like the exact people who should be paying more into the Social Security system, because you're super rich, like you're doing all right. Why can't you help old grannies? I don't really get it, but there's and I should look up the history. I'll be honest with you, but I have not done that yet, and I will actually change that, and I'll post a little update. But the last time I looked at it, it was at above $115,000. So you pay Social Security on your income from 0 to 115 grand. It's just automatically drawn by the government, and then from that $115,001 up, you pay nothing. And so that's another reason why Social Security just keeps collapsing under its own weight, because, like we saw in the last lecture, 90% of the wealth is owned by a very small portion, and if they're not kicking into our tax base is just going to keep falling apart. Okay. Some other problems that can arise from asymmetric information. The moral hazard is a really interesting one. People who are insured tend to behave, whether consciously or subconsciously, in riskier ways, right? You think, well, I won't have to pay for this, so it's not that big a deal. I'll give it a shot. And so we've seen in experiment after experiment that the moral hazard is real, and that people who have insurance do tend to act in riskier ways. So it's a very interesting backward phenomenon. You know what? Somebody else is going to have to cover it, so let them cover it. Interesting sort of human behavior, right? And we can mitigate these through quite a few different techniques. Investigations of fraud, right? Anytime there's a major insurance claim, or you start seeing like a string of insurance claims involving the same name or driver's license number, like, hey, let's go check this out. That sort of thing, just looking for basic fraud. Monitoring and forcing inspections. The chapter talked a little bit about just ensuring that, say, a jewelry company does have the best, maybe they have to have a security guard on staff, they have to have a plan for if there's a robbery, and they have to have, I don't know, a real alarm, and there will probably be a list, and then once a year we'll probably send an inspector to check the facility to ensure that, things are safe on both sides. And that we are actually mitigating the likelihood of the moral hazard, right? Because, if you bought insurance and I'm going to cover all the costs of a robbery, maybe you don't hire a security guard. That's just an extra expense. And maybe you don't put in the very top of the line equipment. Maybe you just put in sort of B+ equipment. And so before they sign you, or even to reduce your premiums on your insurance, you can come to a contractual negotiation with your insurance company if you are a jewelry store owner, and you can sort of say, well, I don't want to have to spend on the security guard, but I'll put these things in place, and then they'll say, okay, well, then it'll cost you this little bit more, and you guys can come to the sort of perfect agreement. This is how much I'm willing to pay. This is how much safety I'm willing to implement in my store. Blah blah blah. Co-payments and deductibles are very important, especially in the health market, and also with auto. These are just really small Well, it depends. It depends on the insurance, but generally, these are pretty small, sort of partnership payments that you make with the insurance company to ensure that you're not going crazy with it. My grandfather, before he passed, who I loved very much, and I still love to this day, and I think about him all the time. He was a hypochondriac, and he he wanted to go to the doctor like 4 times a week and tell the doctor about everything that's going wrong and this new thing that he thinks he has. And he was a funny old man, but that's that's the sort of thing that co-pays and co-insurance are supposed to, at least to help to alleviate. And the research suggests that it does. That even just a very small co-payment, like $10, something that it really isn't going to hurt you, but it is going to make you think, do I really want to spend this $10? It actually, just these very, very small co-payments can actually reduce the number of doctor visits by 1/3 and have no effect on your actual, your I've seen anywhere from like 1/4 to 1/3 and really have no effect on your life expectancy or any of the other health indicators. So it's kind of funny what a very, very small barrier to someone going to the doctor, even if it is only $5 or $10, how much of an effect that will have in ensuring that you're not taking up too much of the doctor's time. You also have the adverse selection problem, and this is a very, very big problem. The adverse selection problem says that the more that I need insurance, the less the insurance company wants to provide it for me, right? The only people really banging down the doors at the insurance companies are the ones who really need to be insured. And so, maybe it's humorous on the auto side where you can just imagine a sort of cartoonish driver banging into stuff all the time, and they're constantly having to call up their mechanic, and so they're just begging for auto insurance. But it's not so funny on the sort of health side, right? Like somebody has cancer and they really, really desperately need insurance and they can't get it, or because not everyone is involved in the insurance market, the insurance is now going to cost them so much, such an exorbitant amount of money that they can never afford it. And so it's almost like, what's the point of it even existing? So the adverse selection problem is a real serious problem. This is the main problem for why government has stepped in, at least with automobiles, and said that everyone just has to buy in, right? First of all, automobiles can cause horrific accidents. It is a serious piece of machinery. You are privileged to be able to use one, especially on the beautiful roads that the federal government provides and your state and local governments. And so you need to keep safe with your driving, but you also need to be insured, right? Because you could seriously injure someone else, and even if you don't injure them, you're going to cause them extreme financial hardship if you wreck their vehicle, which is in America often your likeliest path to work, right? It's not like we have a great train system in America or anything. So in America, they've said that like everyone has to buy in. Here's the problem, right? You get this escalating dropping out of people in the system if you allow people to just opt in or opt out of car insurance. What are the problems with this? The book offers this really interesting example where you have a group of drivers. One small group's costs for the year would be $100 per person, another $1,000 per person, and then another group's was about $15,000 per person. They're the people who like destroy a car every year, I guess. It sounds dangerous. Probably going to need health insurance too, but you get my point. So the problem is that if you want to average this out, it would cost everybody about $1,860 per year. Well, the people whose costs were only $100, hell no. I'm not. I'm not paying $1,900 for car insurance. I've only had one ticket in 14 years. Why? Why would I possibly ever pay that amount of money? Like that makes no sense. I will never have to spend that much money on the damage that I cause because I'm a wonderful driver, right? And maybe that's hubris, but of course there are drivers out there like that, even if it's not hubris. Many will be hubristic, and you're just not as good a driver as you think you are. But, but there really are. If you put everybody on a curve and you just list the safest to the least safe, like there are going to be safe drivers, period. And so why are they having to pay so much, right? It's because we have to make the price of insurance affordable for the most extreme drivers, right? And so maybe we do kick their premiums up a little bit more than average, but we certainly can't charge them the 15 grand a year that they're pulling out of the system. And so it becomes a very, very weird thing where, okay, well now if the government doesn't force everyone to buy insurance, all of the safe drivers are going to drop out, right? And the medium and the bad drivers are still buying in at the 1,860 because it'll cost them less over time. But then when the safe drivers drop out, it's going to drive that cost up, right? And now the safe drivers and the medium drivers start to drop out, and then the cost of insurance just skyrockets, right? And now you just have the least safe drivers trying to buy insurance, right? And I'm sure this sounds familiar as I put in the notes. This is sort of how the healthcare system in America has worked. We just see skyrocketing prices because all of the young and healthy people in the United States are not involved in the insurance system for a multitude of different reasons. For many of the reasons that we've just discussed, sort of the adverse selection problem and the youth and hubris and the idea that people are I'm not going to die. I'm a young person. I'm not going to get sick. I'm a young person. I'm healthy. I've never been sick before. Why would I expect to get sick in the future? These sorts of things, asymmetric information, all of these different things preclude people dropping out of the insurance system, right? Because it probably would be more expensive for them than the actual good that they would get from owning the insurance. The problem is that the people who are sort of medium and high risk, they can't get insurance except at extraordinary costs. And then they even start to drop out, which spirals the cost further and further. And you see where I'm going with this. And so the entire rest of the developed world has said, this is just, we can't have this. We will provide health care for all citizens. You'll just have to pay in through your taxes, and we will sort of singularize the market. If you want, there will be some private firms out there from whom you can buy, from which firms are not people, from which you can buy. I'm a grammar freak. I don't know if you've noticed in my notes on your papers, but I'm a grammar freak. Man, where was I? I completely lost. Okay, from which you can buy from firms. there will be other firms out there who can provide additional insurance, right? Was the point I was trying to make. And so if you want a gold standard plan, like you can go out and buy an extra plan if you live in Canada or if you live in Great Britain, these sorts of things. But the states in all of Europe, in most of Latin America, in most of North America, all the developed states have gone to a socialized medical system where there's a single payer generally. And there are numerous benefits to this system. There are problems. As we've discussed, like the people who are healthy, they are going to be spending more than they necessarily have to. And so for youth and healthy people, this is detrimental. But it's also, it helps to balance out the costs. Singularizing the healthcare system into a central authority also helps to reduce administrative costs dramatically. Administrative costs are just through the roof in the United States. It's insane how much of a proportion of healthcare is spent on like paperwork and people just like crunching data into computers and that sort of stuff. It is quite wild, and mailing out bills and it's wild how much we spend in America in comparison to the rest of the OECD. So let's move down here, and I just want to walk you through some graphs and some just facts about comparative healthcare and across the world, and then within the United States. I tried to look up some cool graphics to show you guys. All right, so if we move down to the U.S. healthcare section, this first graph is U.S. per capita spending in the different OECD countries, and so the blue line. Excuse me, I have gastro issues. The blue line is the OECD average, and the OECD on average tends to spend about $5,500 per citizen per annum. And I think this was 2020. So really recent data, which I love, and is kind of hard to find sometimes. It's usually 5 or 6 years old is the best data. But healthcare is a hot topic, so it gets good data collection and distribution. So in 2020, the OECD average was $5,500. You can see that the United States is literally double that. We are spending $11,000 per citizen in healthcare. It's a lot of money, especially when you look at Italy and Japan, who have two of the longest living populations on the planet, who are spending so much less per capita. You're talking a third of what the United States are spending. So really interesting cross-comparative statistics. You can also look at, I brought in this next one, which looks at administrative costs per capita and long-term care per capita. So this is for elderly. Our long-term care in the United States is really poor. And this is one of the reasons that we don't have a great system for elderly care in America. And this is something that's changing. I think COVID has really brought a lot of light to the nursing home situation in the United States. We have a growing elderly population. We don't really know what to do with them. Our society even is wrestling with what to do with our elderly. So there's also some really interesting gerontological research on this phenomenon, on the sort of the schism, the societal schism that is happening in the United States with our elderly. Gerontological research. Gerontology is study of the elderly. Also, I'm not just a freak about grammar. I love research, as you could probably tell, because I talk about all kinds of different strands of research, and they all touch on economics, which is so cool. So, anyway, the United States does not spend well for its elderly care, but we do spend really well with administrative costs. We're spending way, way more. Like, we're talking about multiplicatives more than the rest of the OECD. We're doing really badly when it comes to administrative costs. And this really is simply because of the efficiencies of a single system. It's really weird, right? We sort of extol throughout almost the entire book the wonders of the free market, but then when it comes to healthcare and insurance, the free market has, I don't know, people have moral qualms about it that don't necessarily exist in other parts of the free market. So it's an interesting subject. One that I have largely avoided for much of my life. I'll admit that. It's not something that I study. Okay. If we move on to life expectancy here, if you remember 2 graphs up, we're spending twice as much as the OECD average per capita. For every individual in America, we're spending 11 grand every year, or at least in 2020. You would think that we were getting something for that spending, but we're not. We're not really leading in any indicator of health. We're not leading. I guess we are leading in obesity, just in the perverse way. We're leading in things like heart disease, obesity, diabetes, even children's diabetes, which was a thing that was sort of unheard of 20 years ago. Our life expectancy is not great. We're sort of on par with Latin America and China. Our infant mortality rates are sort of embarrassing, honestly. If you look at the 2015 infant mortality, not by state, excuse me. If you scroll down to the KFF analysis, our infant mortality rates are embarrassing for a developed world. We have a lot of babies dying in utero and at birth, and very shortly post-neonatal. And a lot of this has to do with poverty. Like poor women's children are dying, and those women are dying. And they're dying at really bad rates for the developed world, especially given how much money we're pumping into the system per capita, right? And you can sort of see what's happening here with life expectancy once you start breaking out of the comparative global picture and you scroll down to sort of the county by county picture. You can see where the problem tends to lie. And I think you can build your own historical idea probably of what's happening here. With lack of investment and unwillingness to sort of share resources, a really dark history of slavery and oppression, and it's still playing out to this day in things like life expectancy, poverty rates, education, infant mortality, name something. I guess that's going to be it. I'm going to get off my soapbox for the day. So, just wanted to point out some of these things are like disturbing facts about the American system that really worry me as someone who loves the idea of equal opportunity and doing right by your citizens. Some of these things are a little scary. All right, have a wonderful day. I was just up late thinking about class and thinking about you guys, and I wanted to get another one out there. So I'll probably get some more out tomorrow. I hope you're all happy and healthy, and I'll talk to you soon.